this session by Copper Webb, I think, will be particularly interesting for us because she's going to talk to us about our children communicating in positive ways with each other. So before I bring Copper up, let me tell you a little bit about her. She is a second generation homeschooler. So she graduated from homeschooling. She's a homeschool mom and a homeschool advocate. Right now they reside in Northwest Wisconsin. She has, of course, she's been married for 18 years and they have 5 children. Last year, I don't know if you heard it or not, she did a great talk for us on nature and how nature can rejuvenate us and the way God speaks to us through nature. It's still in the party threads. If you want to go back and find it, that's a great talk. She is very passionate about encouraging parents to embrace the freedom of home education. She's also served as a board member for Homeschool Idaho and presently is a governor for the Homeschool Community Foundation. So it's a really privilege for me to welcome Copper to the screen. Hi, Copper. How are you?
Hello. I'm doing great. Thank you so much for inviting me back to your party. This is so fun.
Well, it is great to have you back. Tell me for a minute, just tell us the ages of your children real quick.
Sure. Well, my eldest turns 14 on Saturday, and then I have a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 2-year-old.
Oh, that's great. So you're in this for the long haul.
Yeah, I am.
Okay, well, listen, I don't want to take up any more of your time, so I'm going to turn the screen over to you, and thank you again for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Homeschool moms are my favorite group of people, so
Amen.
I'm just thrilled to be here.
Amen to that. Thanks so much.
Well, the psalmist wrote, "Behold, how good and pleasant it is when brothers and sisters dwell together in unity." And all the homeschool mamas say, amen. Because if you've been homeschooling your children for any length of time, you know that guiding your child through the relational conflict that inevitably comes from being home together all day, every day, can be even more challenging than teaching your own children to write a clear and a concise paragraph. When you're homeschooling, there isn't a forced break in interacting with each other each day. You know, there isn't that automatic option of space and time apart to smooth out those annoyances at home because we're all together all the time. And that can be a very wonderful thing, but it does come with its own challenges. And as I was preparing for this talk, I thought a lot about my own childhood and my relationship with my siblings and my time being homeschooled myself. And I had totally forgotten about one particular day in our homeschool when one of my brothers and my sister were just arguing and taking it to a whole new level. Now, it wasn't me, of course. I mean, I'm sure that I was just in the basement dutifully completing my BGAU math. But my brother and sister were arguing, and at one point, my brother picked up the telephone and he pretended to dial and he said, "Hello, police. Yes, please come to our home. My sister is being so naughty and you need to take her away to jail." Well, my sister was horrified and she thought that perhaps she needed to call the police to tell them that she was not being naughty. And it was actually my brother who was being mean to her and no one needed to go to jail. So she picked up the phone and she dialed 911 and it rang. And when she heard 911, what's your emergency? She rethought her plan a little bit and hung up the phone. Well, that wasn't the end of it because a police officer was dispatched to our home to make sure that there was no actual emergency. Now, my poor mother, not only was our homeschool day interrupted by her bickering children calling the police, she and my father were homeschooling us under the radar because at that point in time in the state we lived in, homeschooling wasn't exactly legal. So there was an added stress of a police officer showing up during the school day. Thank the Lord, a kind officer came to our home, and we had a guest lecturer in our homeschool that was explaining the proper use of emergency calls. So no one was arrested, not the fighting children and not the parents who are doing this really weird thing called homeschooling. But I think it was about that time in our homeschool that my mom had us then memorize a poem called Brothers and Sisters by Isaac Watts. And it goes like this: whatever brawls disturb the street, there should be peace at home. Where sisters dwell and brothers meet, quarrels should never come. Birds in their little nests agree, and 'tis a shameful sight when children of one family fall out, chide and fight. Hard names at first, and threatening words that are but noisy breath. They may grow to clubs and naked swords, to murder and to death. The devil tempts one mother's son to rage against the another. So wicked Cain was hurried on till he had killed his brother. The wife will make their anger cool, at least before 'tis night. But in the bosom of a fool it burns till morning light. Pardon, O Lord, our childish rage, our little brawls remove, that as we grow to riper age, our hearts may all be love. So, moms, I would like to give you some practical tools for teaching your children to communicate clearly through conflict. Because whether it's siblings or cousins or friends, conflict between children will come because children are human. So, how do we, as moms, how do we quiet that noisy breath? How do we work to remove these little brawls? I'd like to talk to you briefly about strategies for coaching our children through 3 common childhood communication issues. We'll talk about arguing, we'll talk about tattling, and we'll talk about apologizing. I think it's important to add a disclaimer before I go any further. The Webb family is undoubtedly 7 sinners living together under one roof, and we're all learning daily to walk in grace and truth. And sometimes I hesitate a little bit to talk about parenting because I certainly don't have it all figured out. And my children can attest to that. When my second son was 6, he wrote me a Valentine card that said, "You are a good mom. You're not the best. You can do better. Keep trying." Well, I kept that card because I'm certainly not going to argue with that assessment. And I hope that I keep trying to do better and be a better mom until the day that I die. So I'm a mom in the trenches just like you. And while I don't have a magic wand to hand you that will bring peaceful communication to your home, I would like to share some helpful tools that I've learned along the way in training children in communication. So first up, let's talk about arguments. Man, childish arguments, they can spring up over anything, like who should have which color cup or what they should name the ladybug that was found on the front porch. And it certainly can be exhausting to have a seemingly never ending train of arguments just parade through our homeschool days. Oh, I love Zan's session at the beginning of the week where she talked about the many hats that homeschool moms wear. And she encouraged us not to put on the drill sergeant hat. And I love that because I've been there, I've done that, and I've totally regretted it. Another hat that I like to encourage moms not to wear is that white powder judge's wig. Because when it comes to conflict in communication with our children, our job as parents is not to be the judge and jury for every disagreement. Our job as parents is to train our children to be good communicators and creative problem solvers. So, if we're going to intervene in these childish quarrels, it should not be for the purpose of settling the argument or just making a judgment. If we're continually getting into all of our children's arguments, we're denying our kids that opportunity to practice communication skills and to practice conflict resolution. So, our goal when we wade into those childish arguments is to open up those blocked channels of communication so that our children can go back to dealing with each other. So, moms, we're going to leave off our judge's wig and we're going to put on our coaching caps. you're going to be a communication coach. So, coach, I've got a 6-point game plan to share with you that hopefully you can utilize on your own team. Here are 6 keys to helping our children communicate when communication is just broken down. First thing we're going to do, moms, is we're going to listen respectfully to each side. This isn't the time to interject our own perspective, and this is also not the time to let our children interrupt each other. We're just going to model listening because that's an important skill. So after we've listened, we're going to acknowledge and name our children's feelings. You're going to say something like, I can see that you are really frustrated that you aren't able to focus on building your Lego ship without interruption. Or we're going to say, I can see that you are disappointed that the last cookie was eaten by someone other than you. Doing so helps our children learn to identify their big emotions. And all of us, whether we're 4 or 44, we're better to manage our feelings when we can recognize them. I had to do that in my own life. Just the other week, I was getting really worked up about something, and I just had to ask the Lord, like, what am I actually feeling? And the Holy Spirit was able to help me identify, like, oh, I'm actually just really disappointed. And once I could hold on to that feeling, I could deal with it. It's the same thing with our children. Sometimes they just get so upset, and there's all these feelings in there. But let's label them, let's name them, and let's give them the tools to work through that emotion. So we've acknowledged and named feelings. Our third step in our game plan is we're going to identify our children's wishes. We're going to cut through all the noise and the emotion, and we're going to see what is it that actually they want. Oh, you would like a turn on the pogo stick, or you would like your sister to ask first before wearing your sweatshirt. By identifying our children's wishes, we're modeling clear and concise communication. So many times our children would get upset and they just go from like 0 to 100. And sometimes that desire for a turn on a pogo stick isn't even communicated because it just all of a sudden goes to, oh, you hog all the fun things. You never let me have a turn at anything. You act like you own the whole world and I never want to play with you again. But when we identify our child's wish, we give them the exact words to express themselves clearly. But once we've done that, we can move on to 4. We're going to show appreciation for the difficulty. Oh man, this is a tough pickle. There is only one purple princess dress, and there are 2 girls who love purple. And then at this point, we can express faith in our children's ability to work out a mutually agreeable solution. You know what? I know, boys, that you are capable of dividing up these tasks equally and that you can figure out a way to get these toys picked up before dinner. Or even, hey, why don't you try asking your brother again? I bet if you used a self-controlled voice and if you were kind, you might be pleasantly surprised at your brother's generosity. Now, this last step that we get to in our communication strategy is often the hardest one for moms. But it's pretty simple. Go away. You're going to leave your children to work out the issue. Now, yes, you can do this because you have unblocked the communication channel. You've guided them through listening to each other. You've helped them express their feelings. You've identified their expectations in a calm and clear manner. And most of the time, the very act of searching for a mutually agreeable alternative will ease the tension between our children. And I think that you'll be surprised at the creative solutions that children come up with once they've been directed through clear communication. Now, of course, there are always exceptions. And then if an argument continues between your children and they're not able to problem solve, you can come back in with a calm, whoa, hey, I see 3 boys who are just growing angrier by the second. I think that we could take a little 30-minute cool down away from each other, and then, we'll try to work on this problem again later. And at that point, when you separate your children and you can talk to them personally, away from the embarrassment of getting in trouble with their brother or their sister, and work on those individual issues. So, all right, that's our 6-point game plan for quieting that noisy breath between our children. We're going to listen. We're going to name feelings. We're going to identify their wishes. We'll show appreciation for the difficulty. We'll express faith in our child's ability to handle this problem. And then we'll go away and let them practice it themselves. Well, our next childhood communication issue is tattling. Tattling can be the worst. I just cringe when I hear, "I'm telling mom." I hate it. So, communication coach, here's your game plan for stopping your little toddler in their tracks. And it's a really simple phrase, and it's borrowed from Matthew 18. So when you hear those footsteps coming, "Mom," you can say to your toddler, "You need to go to them and tell them yourself." Now, many times children use tattling in order to avoid resolving a conflict themselves. Now, you may even know adults who function this way as well. Adults who would rather punt the issue to a higher authority that can resolve an issue with a peer. For a short while, I was on the Homeowners Association board for our neighborhood. And I was so surprised at how many adults would rather write this scathing letter to the entire HOA board complaining about their neighbor rather than simply going around the fence and talking directly to their neighbor about weekend boat parking habits. We don't want our children to be like that. We don't want them to punt issues that they can solve themselves. So here's an example. The other night, we told our children that they could have some screen time after dinner. And one of my sons came to me and said, "Mom, my brother is playing on the iPad in our room, and it's really loud and annoying. Now, don't you think that it would be better if he took the iPad downstairs, or maybe if he wore headphones?" Well, this particular child is rather conflict adverse, and I knew that he thought that he could get what he wanted if he brought in the big guns of parental authority. If he went back to his brother and said, like, "Oh, but mom says that you have to," well, then he would certainly get what he wanted. But I don't want to miss out on this communication practice session. So I asked my son, "Well, have you expressed this to your brother?" "Well, no." Well, I think that if you went back into the room and you explained this to your brother in a kind voice, I think you'd be surprised at how willing he was to put on headphones or go to another room. And that's exactly what happened. My boys were able to solve the problem themselves without an interjection from mom. And that's a total win. I have another example of how you can use "you need to go to them and tell them yourself." The other morning, one of my children burst into my bedroom and smugly announced, "Mom, my brother is racing his toy cars down the stairs, and you specifically told us not to because when we do that, it makes marks on the wall." Well, my response was, "Have you reminded your brother of this rule? Have you encouraged him to obey before you even came and talked to me?" "Well, no." Okay. Well, children often tattle because they want their sibling to get in trouble and be punished. And that's a position of the heart that we need to address. They should not be delighting in the folly of others. And we're told in Hebrews 10:24 that we should spur one another on to love and good deeds. We know from Proverbs 6 that God hates when someone causes strife between brothers. We want our children to be encouragers in their communication, and we don't want them to be creators of future conflict. So, when a toddler comes bearing news of an offense, Send them back to be an encourager of good deeds. And yes, I'll recognize that siblings do not always respond well to each other, and your involvement in ending that misbehavior may still be required. But in terms of dealing with the communication issue of tattling, Matthew 18 should be applied first. Honey, talk to your sibling first, and if the issue cannot be resolved, then you can come and appeal to mom. All right, our last tool that we're going to talk about today is teaching your children to truly apologize. And our society is full of faux apologies. How many times do we hear things that like, well, I'm sorry that you got mad, or I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings, or I'm sorry, but I was in a hurry, or I was stressed, or none of these apologies acknowledge any wrongdoing. A sincere apology for wrongdoing goes like this: I am sorry for, and it's named. And it's followed up with, it was wrong because. That's showing understanding by spelling out exactly why the action was wrong. And then we can follow up with, next time I will. Encourage your children to demonstrate a commitment to changing their behavior. And then at that point, we ask, will you forgive me? I once heard Mike Ferris talk about how when his children had a falling out, he would have them end their apologies by taking the hand of their sibling and saying, you're my best friend. And I really liked that idea to add that last step of reconciliation, which prevents children from being like, oh, yeah, I forgive you, and then they run away. So I often talk to my children about how God chose to put us together in the same family for a reason. And it's part of his perfect plan that we are all Webbs. So I adopted a version of Mike Ferris's strategy, and I have my children finish their apologies by taking their sibling's hand or by giving them a hug. And then they say, I'm so glad that we're part of the same family team. Now, yes, it is a little awkward, and my kids don't really like having to do that, but it's just that combination of physical touch with words of affirmation that usually makes the sun burst forth and birds start singing, and we all live in blissful harmony for at least 2 weeks. Okay, well, maybe not. Doing this doesn't bring about world peace, but that kind of physical touch and the words of affirmation do go a long way in resolving any residual contention between my children. Now, we could probably talk for hours on coaching our children through all kinds of common childhood communication issues. And you may be thinking like, well, what about yelling? My child yells all the time. Or what about manipulation or whining or interrupting? So we have limited time, but I do have an excellent resource to recommend to you. And it's this book. It's called I Can't Believe You Just Said That. Isn't that a great title? This book was written by a homeschool mom, Ginger Hubbard, and it's rich with scripture. And it's an excellent guide for reaching beyond the behaviors of the communication struggles and addressing the issues that are in your child's heart. So this is one of my go-to parenting books. I want to encourage you, my fellow homeschool moms, that if you're feeling overwhelmed by the intense parenting that comes by the nature of homeschooling, just don't be discouraged. Homeschooling is a very worthwhile investment in the lives of your children. Someone once asked me if I could name an unexpected benefit of having been homeschooled. And my response was that because I was homeschooled and I was around my parents and my 6 siblings so much, I learned how important it was to communicate clearly. That ignoring issues and just hoping that they go away is not an effective communication strategy. I learned with all this day in, day out communication through conflict, why it's so important to seek peace and to pursue it. And I highly value unity within my relationships. And I can say that that has helped me a lot in my workplace. It's helped me with friendships, and it really has helped me in my own marriage. So, when I was being homeschooled, was there a childish rage between brothers and sisters in our homeschool? Yep, there was. Is there at times childish rage in my homeschool now with my own kids? Yep, there is. But I do know that homeschooling, all that hands on parenting time, provides an ideal environment to practice good communication skills so that with the Lord's help, as we grow to riper age, our hearts may all be love.